Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the third and final panel session at the Games London Summer Business Hub. My name is Michael French. I'm the head of Games London, and I'm just popping up here, head of our next panel, to introduce our speakers, do a bit of housekeeping. Firstly, I want to thank all our delegates again for logging on the last day or so. Games London is funded by the Mayor of London with the mission to make London the games capital of the world, but we've actually been able to offer this event for free thanks to three partners, Here East, Reddit and Powster. So thanks to them for supporting us. Hundreds of meetings have taken place over the last 36 hours. Nearly 200 games businesses from all over the planet are represented. So hopefully people are making some good connections and doing business. I can see that people are tuning in, so feel free to say hello in the chat alongside the panel. If you do need to switch off or come back in at any point for other meetings that might be at the same time, the panel's recorded, it'll be on YouTube later. You can find our other two panel discussions there too. On to the discussion coming up, we're handing over to a kind of a panel supported by one of our partners, Here East. We're going to be looking at the future of our sector and the ways games can actually design a better world and better future. You don't need me to remind you of reasons, the way the world has changed in the last few months. The fact we're logged on to an online event is a reminder of that enough, I think. But over the last 4 months, we've seen the great impact games have had on people's lives. And now we want to explore what that means for the future by asking three businesses, all located in East London, conveniently, but we'll delve into that in a minute. To chair the discussion, we have George Osborne, Head of Comms at UKI. That association has seen firsthand the various ways games have been invaluable and resilient during the pandemic, so he's the perfect person to be asking the questions. That's it from me. I'll let our panel get underway. If you have any questions for our panelists, type them into the chat and we'll pick them up for the end of the session. But that's it. I'll sign off now. George, over to you.
Well, thank you for the perfect introduction there, Michael. I mean, I honestly couldn't think of anything better than someone describing me as perfect to start a conversation. So we're going to be talking about how games can design the future, but rather than listening to me blaver on about it, I think let's go and talk to some experts instead, shall we? So I'm going to introduce you to all of our panelists one at a time in a nice, coherent order, and we'll crack on with the show. So first of all, I'm going to go over to Gavin Poole from Here East. Gavin, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so Gavin Poole, I'm the Chief Exec of Here East. I've been involved in the project from the get-go. So there's a small group of us who put the project together in 2011, put the bid together. And if you're not familiar with what Here East is, it's the former media hub, the International Press and Broadcast Centre, which was broadcasting the Olympics when it was in town back in 2012 to the world. So it's a mere 1.2 million square foot of space. With a collection of large global businesses, small startups, an innovation center called Plexel, which has about 122 companies. We've got 4 universities on site, and it's self-contained technology and creative industries hub and campus. So we basically built a cluster from scratch in a part of the capital, which was going through this massive regeneration as a result of London 2012, and we've played our role in that. And we have the likes of, we're here from Miles later, Sports Interactive based with us, University College London, Loughborough University, the Digital Institute London, the new Staffordshire University, Outpost, which is delivering games degrees, master's degrees in esports and cyber and games design. So it's a real eclectic mix, but really focused on creative industries, the use and the power of technology. And the point of bringing sport and technology together is something we're really interested in now in driving through the future of esports.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for that, Gavin. And our next panelist, Miles from Sports Interactive. Miles, do you want to dive in and tell us a little bit about your, shall we say, extensive career in the games industry so far?
Hi, everyone. Thanks a lot for tuning in today. As has been said a couple of times, my name's Miles. I run a studio called Sports Interactive. We're responsible for the Football Manager series of games and are very proud tenants of Here East, which is where our only office is based. We've actually run out of space, so it's quite good being in here with your landlord at the moment with Gavin, because we are trying to get some more space out of him to be able to stay in what is a fantastic hub. We originally found out about Here East actually from the Mayor of London's office via Sadiq, so it's great to be able to be here today with Games London, which is obviously something that he's very passionate about as well. We currently have, or when we were last in the office, we had 155 of us, I believe. By the end of next week, there's going to be 190 of us, and we're about to put some more jobs live as well. So should hopefully be at 200 people by the end of the year. We deliver annual games, currently working on 19 SKUs to try and to see if we can release them during a pandemic. We haven't announced any of them as yet because we're still working out all of our release dates and stuff like that, because working in a pandemic is very different to working normally. We've certainly learnt that we work better together, and Here East is the place that we choose to do that, whilst working alongside some of the universities in there, some of the businesses that are in Plexel, which is the incubator space that they have at Here East, and the universities in particular that we like to work with. And I miss it, and I really miss Breakfast Club. But thankfully, not going to Breakfast Club and getting a cycling machine that fits under my desk has meant that I've lost a load of weight during lockdown.
And it's good to hear that we're having some productive time done during lockdown. I think that's what's really important here. So finally, though, before we go and talk a little bit more about what Miles was touching on there about working in a pandemic, I want to go over to our final panelist. So Dami, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about what you're working on over at MoonHub?
Absolutely. So my name is Dami Hastrup. I'm the founder and director of MoonHub. We're a virtual reality interactive training platform company. And as you can imagine, with the events unfolding after COVID-19, the use for our technology has skyrocketed. We're now partnered with food delivery takeaway companies. Supermarkets are now approaching us as well to help tackle their remote training needs. And virtual reality is a technology that we've been passionate about for years. The company was founded back in 2016, and we are residents in Plexel, which is the innovation center that Gavin talked about earlier. And Miles, to touch on the Breakfast Club point, our office is actually right above Breakfast Club. So every single morning there is a temptation, especially when they start cooking. But being in Plexel has been amazing. We are super excited for this next chapter of our business, especially now that we are continuing to grow as a company and acquire even more companies that know that the shift towards VR is a natural next step when it comes to e-learning and learning and development in corporate companies.
Fantastic. So I think that's everyone lovely introduced there. But I think before we start talking about the future, we have to talk about the present. You know, it's been one heck of a year. I think that's fair to say. I think we've all had to experience quite a different working year, quite a different working environment, and just adapt to an entirely new way of working. And I think, Miles, I'm going to go to you first on this because you started touching on it already. How has the pandemic changed the way that you've been working in terms of your studio?
It's been tough. You know, making games is tough anyway, but making games during a pandemic is way harder. A lot more Zoom calls and Teams calls. I think everyone is seeing that at the moment. But the number one priority, as it always is the people who work for the studio, making sure that everyone is safe, making sure that everyone is well. That's been our big priority. We've certainly had to change scope for the games that we're working on at the moment because productivity is different for different people. And when you're working on games and you're expecting 100% productivity from everyone, if someone has 70% productivity and someone else has 130% productivity, that doesn't equal 100% because the person with 70% could end up being a bottleneck elsewhere. I really miss the daily interaction with everyone. I don't just run the studio, I direct one of the games, I exec produce the other games. Having to fit into different people's schedules because they might be in a meeting when I need to get hold of them, which isn't really the case in the office because I just walk into the meeting and go, I need a quick chat. Plus, you know, we're owned by Sega, and there've been a lot more meetings with Sega during this from a financial planning perspective as well. They're a stock market listed company, so you have to think about their shareholders as well as our team and the people who play the game. We made some quite bold decisions early on. I think people were expecting us to add COVID to our game because we had Brexit in there pretty soon after Brexit happened. We decided that the game should be a COVID-free zone. We decided that we wanted the game to be an escape for people from their normal lives. We made the game available for free to people to play for 2 weeks when the lockdown first started happening, because George, I know this is a subject that you're very passionate about as well. I'm incredibly passionate about people's mental health, and we believed that was going to be something that would definitely suffer from people essentially being under house arrest at the start of all of this. So we wanted to make the game available free to play for longer, but we're actually asked not to, because it was using too much bandwidth at a time when the emergency services needed as much bandwidth as they could get. So we stopped doing that and instead gave free in-game advertising to a bunch of mental health charities from around the world that have now had over 50 million adverts served, where people can click on the ad hoarding. If they are having any problems, click on the ad hoarding. It will take you directly to the website to be able to get help. But the creative process, we are a business, so the creative process has continued. It's just been a lot harder. We've learned a lot along the way. And what we've also learned is that basically, and I'm sure this is the same for everyone, people have peaks and troughs, right? When it comes to productivity and when it comes to mental health. I've had a bad couple of days this week where I've been really grumpy. And, you try and hide that from people. But, a lot of the time I've been okay. I'm really lucky. I've got a garden, but some of our team members live in shared houses with 4 or 5 people. So we've made sure everyone's had the equipment that they've needed. We've made sure everyone's had the internet connections that they've needed. We've even made sure that they've had the links to food delivery places when they might not have been able to get it from the large supermarkets at the start. So there's been a lot of things that we've never thought of before as a studio that we've had to do. And, it's just, I'm impressed every single day by what the team are able to work on. We're kind of used to home working, in that 10 or 20% of our team have been working from home and working from different countries for the last 20 years. That having everyone working from home is a very, very different thing. And yeah, it's been tough, but I also know how lucky we are that we have a great office waiting for us if and when the virus stops. And we have been able to adapt our working practices to the reality that we face without having to furlough anyone, and while still getting paid, because games as a sector have done pretty well during the pandemic, because so many people have been at home, and the people who are less lucky than us that still have jobs have had little to do during that time. So when it's been raining outside, they've been turning to computer games, which I'm incredibly thankful for, and hope that we've provided very good value for money for them whilst they have been playing it. Because with the recession that is hitting now and round the corner, wow, this is doom and gloom. Hey, this is the world at the moment, right? We have to be mindful of that as well. So providing great value for money to our consumers is definitely an important facet of our business, and always has been.
Of course. And I think picking up on that, and one of the really interesting points was mentioning that point around productivity and keeping going. I think it's fair to say I've had some days where it's completely fallen off a cliff, and I've had some days where it's been magnificent, where I've been able to get my eye in and just work really hard. But I was going to jump over to Dami actually to talk a little bit about this in terms of the present scenario, because, as you've been saying, there's real appetite at the moment for the service that you're offering. So how have you managed to juggle the challenges of lockdown and COVID-19 while also actually having to deal with what sounds like quite an interesting sort of expansion of your business? That must be a heck of a challenge.
Yeah, no. So it's been very interesting actually, because the benefits of using virtual reality as a technology to train staff, paramount. I mean, PwC published a report not long ago demonstrating that, workers who train using VR, they demonstrated higher confidence in applying what they've learned. And employees completing their training, up to 4 times faster than, normal classroom courses, show that even during times of lockdown, technology such as ours is technology to push companies forward. Being a startup, of course, it almost felt a bit like back to basics when we were working from home at the beginning. It was a transition that wasn't difficult for us. We were very grateful for that, mainly because the way we operate and the way we work is quite agile and cloud-based anyway. So that also lends to the scalability of what MoonHub does. We're able to not only deploy our technology with these companies remotely, but then we're also able to help them scale and expand from where we are. And, the logistics of things during lockdown it's been quite interesting. Now that things are starting to ease up, the meetings and the physical meetings are being booked in quicker than we could have anticipated. But during lockdown, we had a lot of companies approaching us saying, let's do this, let's get going. And one partnership that we've signed and we're excited to unveil soon is they actually said that they'd wish they had our technology prior to lockdown because they would have hardly felt the effects of onboarding new staff. So for us, it's definitely shown how technology like ours can not only help in a normal day-to-day setting, but could have also helped a lot of companies during lockdown, but can also prevent similar logistical issues that have come about from lockdown from happening again in the future. And I think that's what a lot of companies who are coming to MoonHub for training solutions now, I think that's what they're trying to essentially prevent from happening in the future. They don't want repeats of the disjointed scrambling to get things working again kind of feeling that they had during this lockdown, just in case there is a second spike or they do need to streamline certain things due to economic factors, so on and so forth.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I think sort of something that I'm now going to go around as well to talking about in terms of this growth trajectory and talking a little bit to Gavin about your kind of experience in terms of Here East, because you mentioned at the top of this, the breadth of companies that you work with, the variety of different businesses that are making their home at Plex or at Here East. What have you seen in terms of the various experiences there? Like, I mean, how is it differing from company to company? I mean, those kinds of stories that we've heard there from Miles and David, there are similarities there, and I think there's some common experiences, but are you also seeing some big differences too?
We do, and it differs across the site. So, one thing that we are really keen to do is engage with all of our customers, literally on a daily, weekly basis. And, but Miles and Dami are not alone. There is a lot of growth areas across the site. But there's also been a change as well. So, we've also got cultural organisations. So the likes of Studio Wayne McGregor putting forward dancers and a dance company and how they perform around the world on different stages. Of course, that whole sector has just completely disappeared. And something that Wayne is very keen on is the use of technology, the use of imagery, the use of 3Ds into the audience. So that is kind of dried up and gone away. In a lot of the other areas, though, some of the larger companies, it's been interesting to watch as they go through what is the pandemic doing. And for us, the thing we hear time and time again for the people who come back to fight, either to make the place ready for someone for their teams to come back, or to explore, okay, what do we need to do to the office to make it fit for social distancing, is the team wants to come back. They're missing the office. They like home working when it's set up and going well, but they're missing what they joined an organization for. The team, particularly in all of the organizations we've got on site, it's about that creative process. And trying to run that creative process remotely is really challenging, particularly on the back of everybody is facing a crisis to start with. And in fact, some still are facing a crisis as we slowly will come out of recovery, and whatever that may mean for many different organizations. But the future of the office, the future of people returning to Here East, is something which has engaged every single person, and they do want to come back. But they want to come back into what we've termed a safe and secure environment. So we've made it very, very easy for people to come back. It's very self-explanatory. But the underlying thing is they want to return. They really do want to return. Now, that returning process will help those organizations really start to drive through their own personal recovery as well. And you can see it. So I think, it's a mixed bag. People have been able to work. They've got by. They've done very well in some instances. And they've put in new processes. They've probably now gone back and revisited their own working processes, such as we have as well, about, okay, what are the benefits to remote working? Do we want to transition to a partial remote working solution where people have a little bit more flexibility, because we do see the benefits of that in some areas, and adopting those types of new processes, ready to allow them to do something different in the future. But what it will do, it'll reshape the office. It doesn't mean to say the office will become less. And people say, oh, he's bound to say that as a real estate guy. My background is social policy, humans, what makes society tick. And before that, I'm an aerospace engineer. So I'm new to property. It's the first thing we've ever done. But looking at it from a social point and looking at, Miles is talking about mental health and well-being, getting back to the office in amongst your teams in a way where you have more creative space as opposed to racks and racks and racks and desks. I think that's where we're moving to. So I anticipate over the next 12 months, quite a lot of discussions with our customers, not so much about taking more space, although that would be amazing, wouldn't it? But actually talking about how they're going to reconfigure their space. And is there a way they can use Plexel in the short term whilst they do this reconfiguration? And I think that's what we're here to do, is to help people grow, help them innovate, and help them through this transition into a real estate solution because of what we've got to offer.
And I think that point about reconfiguration is a fascinating one, because if you're reconfigurating the way you're going into the office, you're going to be reconfiguring as well the way you work. You're going to have to think about those kind of implications down the line. So, Miles, I mean, in terms of the work of Sports Interactive, how is this new reality, or the new normal, if we're going to use the particular buzzword at the moment, how is that going to affect the way that you think that Sports Interactive is going to work on games? Do you envisage returning to some form of previously had normal, or are you planning on developing something new to suit this environment?
So we've got out of our team, which is about, I mentioned the numbers earlier, we've got 6 people who desperately want to be back in the office. So at the moment we are working with Here East to reconfigure to get those 6 people back as quickly as possible so that they can be back in there. That will also mean that we'll have some meeting space there. We're very lucky that we have lots of parks around there as well, so we can go and have meetings in parks and get a few people back in who, for whatever reason, feel that they need to be back in. I mentioned earlier that we're talking to Gavin at the moment about getting new space, and the idea of that is so that we can have more space for expansion for when we may in the future be back to normal, but in the meantime, for what is the new normal, be able to have more people back in the office in a socially distanced way. We are well aware that there are some people in the team who have already kind of made the decision that they don't want to be back in the office full time, and that's fine. We will be dealing with all of those individually. We will be looking at whether do we need to be in 5 days a week, or can we be in 2 days or 3 days a week? For the last couple of years, I've actually been forced, if I say that nicely. I don't know if Matt, my COO, is watching this panel or not, but Matt made it very clear to me that he only wanted me in 4 days a week and wanted me to be out and about 1 day a week, having the kinds of meetings that I couldn't have before he was in place, to be looking at the future strategy of the business. So that might be working from home just for thinking time, because when I'm in the office, my office is a bit like Piccadilly Circus, just a constant stream of people going in and out, or whether it be out there going out and meeting potential future partners about things. So we've always been flexible with it anyway, but if someone has during lockdown moved up to the Peak District to live with his girlfriend's parents, and they found out that they love it, then we will find a way for them to be in the office less moving forward. But as I mentioned earlier, we are better together. There needs to be some days when we can actually all be in a room for brainstorming, because having it as structured as it is at the moment, with the way that Zoom meetings all have to be scheduled, that structure isn't great for creativity. So for some people in their roles, they are itching to be able to have those creative brainstorming meetings again. And for others, less so. But hopefully the new space, we will be able to configure in a way where we'll be able to have a lot more people back in the office and a lot more people working together. But, who knows whether there ever will be an old normal. We've been very flexible in the last 6 months, as a lot of businesses have been, or the last 4 months rather, as a lot of businesses have been, and we continue with that flexibility. If I was to give one piece of advice to people who are struggling a bit with working from home, or to any company who actually care about their teams, give every single person in your team a budget for home exercise equipment. Now, the people who know me are on here will be going, what's he talking about? Miles hasn't done any exercise since 1979. And they would be right to say that. My normal exercise involves my drinking arm. But I've found that whenever I've struggled to concentrate, my little under-desk cycling machine has been great for that. Other people like to go and have a break, so might have bought some weights, might have even just bought some running shoes to be able to go out there. But it's those little touches that all businesses that are still going during this can afford, saving money in other ways. And Heroes have been pretty good with rates savings. So thank you for that, Gavin. We've reinvested that money in other ways. I think it's so important to be looking after your team in this situation, and letting them keep all of that when they do come back to the office. Because I can't think of any forward-thinking business that are going to be going back to 5 days a week in the office, everyone being there 9 till 5. I do know some businesses who've done that, and all of the people who work for them, and I'm very careful when I talk about people at SI. Everyone is part of a team. Some companies don't treat people the same way, and some companies would call their people staff, and they're treating them like staff. And I don't believe you get the best out of people if you think of the people that work with you as being staff, because it makes me think of people being dispensable. So it's brilliant to see people spending money on platforms like Dummies that are able to help with bringing new people up to speed. We probably need to have a chat, mate, because I'd love someone to be doing a VR thing of our office, so that we can actually be showing it off to people at a time where we're hiring faster than we've ever hired before.
Yeah,
it would be lovely to have a VR video of our office, because we're very proud of it. Great, thanks.
Yeah, we'd love to.
Let's swap details afterwards.
I mean, I'm just going to dive in here and just say this is the Summer Business Hub summarised, right? We've come into this space together, and look, business is being done. But Dami, I think as well, this goes into a really nice question, because, okay, Miles's conversation about technology was about exercise technology, which is obviously super and fantastic, and I've got my exercise bike just here. But I think the role of new technology as well within the future of games, within the future of the way we work, I think it's really critical, and you're in that kind of position at the moment where you're seeing a lot of companies take advantage of it. So what's your experience now being in terms of this uptake in terms of new technology? How important is it now for companies to find that sort of center point where they can have tech that connects people who, yes, they might be working together in the office, but also they might have to be spending time working remotely because of personal reasons, because we don't know what the future holds in terms of COVID. How are people bridging that gap?
Yeah, for sure. So I think traditionally, a lot of the times, bigger companies tend to be more risk averse and took on the viewpoint that if it's not broken, don't fix it. And I think with lockdown and the effects of COVID-19, that all went out the window, unfortunately, as well, for a lot of companies. This meant that things were very disruptive. So people were trying out Zoom, Microsoft Teams, even Google Hangouts. They were trying all manners of things to try and keep not only workflow in the workplace going well, but also workplace culture alive as well. But I think due to essentially rules and norms pretty much going out of the window during this time, I think companies are becoming less risk averse and probably more tech or more interested in tech or tech savvy due to the endless possibilities that they see in new tech. VR has definitely seen a massive surge in interest, purely because of the power of VR and what it can actually do in terms of transporting somebody basically to wherever you want them to be. And with the advancements that have been made in virtual reality hardware in themselves, it's not only cheaper or at its cheapest ever to buy a VR headset, but they're also the most sophisticated VR headsets on the market to date. And they don't require supercomputers to power them. So all the VR headsets that we use are all self-contained. You pop them on your head and you don't need wires, calibration. You can literally be sat in the lunchroom and doing any sort of training or orientation that you need. And I think for companies to be able to keep people as immersed or feeling as much of part of the company as possible, a technology like virtual reality is one that, or just mixed reality in general, is one that, a lot of companies are seeing as the way forward, especially because, as Miles was correctly saying, when it comes to forward-thinking companies, the 9 to 5, 5 days a week isn't going to be the structure going forward, mainly because a lot of people now have realized that a lot of what they can do can be done from home. But that essence of being in the office, being together, is really, really important for companies as well. So whilst people are working from home, or whilst the schedules are still mixed from working from home and working from the office, having technologies that can connect people and almost transcend the barrier of whether you're there or not, those technologies will be the ones that are most heavily looked at during this time period. And it's definitely an exciting leap forward when it comes to adopting new tech, because I think now more than ever is when we'll really see the adoption of technologies being used in the mainstream. And for MoonHub, our end goal is for people to pick up a VR headset as casually as they would do with an iPad, essentially. And that's what we want to see with VR in the mainstream.
I think you're making a really interesting point as well about, again, that shifting in perception about the way that ideas that previously people could recognize some potential, but maybe weren't diving fully in on. People are now really starting to gather why they're important, why they're transformational, and why they could be great. So I'm going to use this as a lovely little segue into esports. Now, obviously, esports has been going for quite some time, good couple of decades, especially if you're a big fan of anything Korean. You would have, of course, been aware of everything that's been going on in terms of StarCraft, or over in China, you've had League of Legends. But in the UK, I think one of the things about actually this period of time is that people, I think, have really started to recognise that value of esports on a much broader basis than before. We had the Formula One at the outset of lockdown, beginning the virtual races. I may have participated in the official Football Manager EFL tournament, got knocked out by Birmingham, Lee Camp's Birmingham in the last 16. It was absolutely outrageous.
But if you're going to get knocked out, George, getting knocked out by a professional footballer is still pretty cool.
It's exactly. It was a pretty good moment, and that would never have happened without competitive games being played online in front of an audience. In my case, a large amount of Birmingham fans who invaded my Twitch channel and just spammed the chat with Birmingham chants. It was a very strange experience. But Gavin, I'm coming over to you in relation to this, because obviously in terms of here East, you've got Staffordshire University, they've got an offshoot in London that's looking specifically towards this. What kind of opportunities do you think is now being afforded towards the esports scene as a result of this particular crisis, and where do you think it might be going in the coming months and years as a result of that?
I mean, it's very easy just to slip into the language of saying esports has had its moment and it's now mainstream. I think there's still a lot of area to make it more central, more core. What I think has been really exciting though is to see it move away from seeing it on various TV channels like Red Bull. And moving into BT Sports, Sky, starting to become like seeing the BBC Sports Channel, live streaming the Formula E races, virtual Formula E races. I'm a big motorhead, so For me, that was great. And I was able to turn around to friends and actually my wife and say, hey, look at this. And the quality of it was such that I thought this was not happening at the moment. I actually thought it was proper real racing that was going on, such was the quality of it. So I think there has been a definite shift to put it into the real world. Now, that is for crossover sports. So you were talking about the football that's going on. I'm talking about the motor racing. But of course, getting people to move into more of the games world as well. So the non-crossover sports. So, the Fortnites, the League of Legends, the Call of Duty, the PUBGs of this world, and being able to get to understand that in itself is a sport, which people get a lot of enjoyment from. And they also get a lot of enjoyment, not just from playing it, but seeing professionals playing it to an exceptionally high level. To even just follow what the games caller is actually is describing is in itself, a challenge for me just to try and follow what's happening on the screen. But to see it as a real sport, and the reach of this is absolutely phenomenal. It's phenomenal for the broadcasters. It's phenomenal for those who want to advertise and promote within. It's absolutely phenomenal for the teams now as they start to get more of a global gathering. And I think when you start to see the impact, and it has the agencies and the brands looking at it, so all of a sudden you start to see this huge growth as it takes off now, to understand that this is something now which has benefits not just to an individual, not just for the enjoyment and the pleasure of people wanting to play games, like playing games, like watching others play games, and have got the competitive spirit like many of us have. We want to actually go and compete and see how good we are against the best of the best. I think that actually shows you that there is something in this now. Now, it's no surprise to us to see a lot of people wanting to go and study this, because you go and study things. The best thing, I was hopeless at school, absolutely hopeless. All of my mates who know me from my school days still talk about the disaster that was me at school. But when I got into studying things that I really wanted to engage in, and I wanted to be, and I was interested in, things took off. So actually, if you're interested in games, you play a lot of games, and you're interested in computer animation, and you're interested in the rise of esports and that sector, you've now got outlets to go and study it. Whether it's with Staffordshire in their Digital Institute in London or in their main campus, whether it's with the new announcement that the UK Sports Association have partnered up with Pearson to launch a BTEC, and this is where I started my sort of next level of education, doing a BTEC, O&D, HNC, and then on to a degree. Then you can do a BTEC and build your way through that whilst doing an apprenticeship. These sort of avenues really open this up now. So not only is it something you participate in terms of a viewer or a player, but actually now you can go and work in this new industry, this exciting industry, which is out there. I think Miles summed it up. We made a film some time ago. Miles summed it up. What a better place. There's no better place, we believe, to do this. It is, the place which is seen as being the most successful Olympics in modern history, London 2012, and the campus which has been born out of the Olympics using all of the connectivity and the infrastructure for this technology campus, and where sports and technology come together. That is where esports kicks off, and that's what we're really focused on now. And the opportunity is massive. It's huge.
Absolutely enormous. And something else that's absolutely enormous and is also here is BT Sports Studio. So if you're looking for a place to do a socially distanced esports tournament, you're probably not going to find much of a better place to do it in London. But it's but I think that point about esports, the changing of perceptions, I think, was one of the things that's really fascinating there. And I wonder as well, I'm going to go to Miles about this, and about the future of games and about how the perception of games in general has changed in lockdown. Because I think it's fair to say that at the start of lockdown, a lot of people saw video games as a way to come and get a bit of an escape. But also, as Miles you were talking about earlier, you was having that opportunity to use Football Manager as a platform for positive messages about mental health. People have been meeting up in games as a way of having conversations. We've had government health messaging put out in games as well to support people. There's obviously been a lot that games have done. Do you think that positive perception of games has occurred? Do you think I'm right about this, or I'm just spinning madly out of control? And if you do think it's occurred, what do you think is going to have? What kind of impact will this have on the sector?
I think it's certainly helped perception-wise. I think we're now past the stage where we're seen fully as evil. There are some people who still do see us as evil, but that's because they haven't grown up with it. And it's one of these weird things. So, like when we're talking about esports as well, esports is still in its infancy. Here East are all over it. They're there on the ground floor. Obviously, we've seen stuff happening in Korea and China. They've had it for a number of years. But in the West, it's still in its infancy. It's going to be 10 or 20 years until the people who have grown up with esports being completely normal are in the positions of power that allow them to be talking about it. I'm talking in the media, basically, that they're talking about it as though it's normal. At the moment, it's still a fight to get any of those broadcasts on. And it took a pandemic where they couldn't make EastEnders anymore and they didn't have any live sport to show for esports to actually get properly on TV, apart from the support that BT Sport have been giving for a number of years with some of the sports games and some other titles. So, you know, we're still, when I first started working in games, it was, I think, 26 years ago now, and I was working in the music industry at the same time, and I didn't leave the music industry for another 8 or 9 years. I was doing games on the side, and everyone thought it was hilarious. Everyone in music thought it was hilarious, and I was this geeky little idiot who was doing stuff with computer games. And they thought that until I worked on the soundtrack of Gran Turismo. So I'd crossed over both. And one of the bands that had a few tracks in Gran Turismo, the singer ended up getting a house out of it. And that was the time that they actually started thinking, oh, there's money in this games thing. So maybe it could be a valid art form. But still took them a long time after there until we were accepted. So esports is going to be the same. There are some people in the sports world who embrace it, and there are some people who are like, hang on a sec, it's using a control pad, it's not a real sport. But it's the same for everything. When the waltz first came over to the UK, it was designated as the devil's dance. Elvis Presley, when he used to be on TV, they wouldn't film him from the waist down because they thought what he did with his legs was disgusting. The Beatles had all kinds of problems when they were around as well. Every generation and every generation's entertainment passion faces this same thing. Gaming has grown massively during lockdown because of certain games. Animal Crossing is one of them, that are a little bit different, that don't require, and we're one of them as well, they don't require a joypad to play. They don't require hand-eye coordination necessarily. It's more about thinking about things, or in Animal Crossing, it's doing things that you'd like to be doing in the real world, like going fishing and that you weren't able to do anymore. And I think they've definitely opened people's eyes a lot to it. But the film industry have had a bad time during the pandemic. The live music industry has had a bad time during the pandemic. TV shows haven't been made. So I think it's going to be a relatively easy for the media to slip back into the, oh yeah, games were the thing we did during the pandemic, and now we can concentrate on other stuff again. I hope I'm wrong on that. I hope that people who make games continue to be thought of in the same way as musicians, film directors, from the entertainment value. And I hope that the government recognise that not only have we been an industry that's carried on working throughout this, but we've also been an industry that have been continuing to sell and have been providing tax revenue to them, rather than needing handouts, which a lot of industries have done. So it's going to take organisations like the one that you work for, George, with Yuki, to continue promoting that. I think the work that I've been very fortunate to be involved with, working with Yuki on, rather than coming up with guidance of what you need to do to come back into the office, which a lot of the creative industries have been doing, and industries that are suffering, we've been able to turn around and go, you know what, we don't actually need that guidance, because we can use the government guidance for reopening the office. What we need to do is guides for best practice working from home, and how do you do motion capture when you're working from home, and how do you do sound recording when you're working from home. And some of those blogs can be found on Yuki's website now, which are useful for all industries. So, you know, I hope you're more right than I am, George. I hope that we still get that recognition, but I think we've got a lot of work to do. And you know, to be frank, the people who've been with us all the way through are the people that are still going to be there in 5 years and 10 years. So they should be our primary focus. If we can turn some more people into having respect for the work that gets done, and for seeing esports as legitimate quicker than the expected timeline that I have, then that would be absolutely amazing. But we can't really take it as a win at a time where loads of people have been unwell. I've lost 3 people that I know to this horrible pandemic. And as we all know, the real heroes of the pandemic have been the frontline workers, the NHS, but also the delivery drivers who've kept things coming through, the garbage collectors. You know, they've done the incredible work. All we've done at the end of the day is entertain people, which keeps them out of trouble, keeps them from being bored. But we haven't done the real work. That's been done by the frontline workers.
And I just spotted in the chat as well, because I mean, we were talking as well about the perception of games in general, and Gavin jumped back in with a comment just to talk about from the parents' perspective. You know, this is something really close to my heart in terms of Yuki's work, because I've been running a campaign since last year called Get Smart About Play, which is all about encouraging safe, sensible, responsible play with games, so that families can enjoy games but still limit things like screen time, in-game spend, etc., etc. So I'm really interested to hear from the parents' perspective, and from you, Gavin. You know, what's been your view of games as a result of the lockdown?
So you know, traditional parent. I've got, you know, two young girls, 11 and 9, and both are, as you'd expect, you know, tech savvy and really into stripping things and trying to learn. But what we've had to go through is from years of, you know, managing the screen time, and probably not oppressive, but very, very controlling about what we do want them to have and access to, and how much, but interfere with schoolwork. Very rapidly, in a space of 5 days, we went, everything's on the screen. Literally from 9 o'clock in the morning until 3:30 in the afternoon, it's screen, Teams, Cisco, whatever, that they're on the screen. And then after that, it's like, well, how do I hang out with my buddies? Because actually, this is something that I would normally go to play, or I'd have my lunchtime, or after school I'd have a meetup, and I wasn't able to. So of course the computer and the screen then became the link into their buddies, and they all transitioned. It was easy for them to hop onto Zoom or do FaceTime, whatever, but they wanted to play with one another. They didn't just want to sit there like this with their kids. So all of a sudden it took them onto a multitude of different games platforms, where they were now suddenly playing together. It might not be competitive, but they were playing together in the same world that they created together, or they hopped into someone else's. And then it got into more competition. So I think we've got this generation now of children who, this is just second nature. And whether they're linked up with friends in the country, or their cousins somewhere else, or their mates who happen to live in America, they're able to have this interaction, which they probably were restricted access before. I think from a parent's point of view, we saw it as a way that they were getting child-to-child interaction as opposed to adult-to-child interaction, as our roles changed massively from being parent to parent, teacher, mentor, and everything else. They needed that interaction. So I think there has been a shift. And I think parents have had to educate themselves as well, not just throw off the shackles and go do whatever you want to do and get in there just because it keeps you entertained and I can get on with my work. I think those who are savvy parents still had all of the right metrics and controls and protection measures in place for the likes that, you know, the information that Yuki has put out over the last 12 to 18 months or so, I think is really important. But I think it's got them more comfortable about the opportunities and the openness that this creates to a child to engage with others that they probably would have missed out during this recent 3 or 4 months or so if they hadn't had access to that. And it's enabled them to do things that, they'd otherwise just possibly just watch Netflix, which is probably not as helpful as doing something with their buddy.
Yeah.
So this is leading us into a world where online games, collaborative games, competitive games online just becomes the norm for children now.
Totally, completely and utterly. I'm going to ask Dami one last question about this as well, which is sort of related, but just to let people know as well in the chat, I think we're coming up to the point where we can definitely take some questions. So if you're in this room and you're thinking, I've got a question for the panel, now is your chance. Try and chuck something in there. I've still got some more just in case, but if you've got a big burning question sitting in your heart, now's the time to go and get it out into the chat. But Dami, I was going to return actually to that point about space and virtual space and the importance of it. Because, I mean, in a sense, that's a large part of what your business is about, right? It's about being able to put people into a space, into an environment, and be able to familiarize themselves with it and use it for training purposes. But I was wondering as well, just more widely about this idea of digital spaces and their importance as ways of people to connect. Do you see that things like both within VR, but also more widely within digital spaces, do you imagine that as a result of lockdown and the future of games is going to hold, that we're going to see more people engaging in these spaces on a more regular basis?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to esports, it's a growing industry, and it's an exciting one to look at as well. To touch on Miles's point, there definitely have been, the comments that, oh, esport athletes aren't real athletes. But if you look at just, the reaction times and training that they have to go through, it really is an art form in and of itself. And it's getting a lot of traction and a lot of steam. And virtual reality as a technology, for the spectators more so, it can actually provide a brand new dimension as to how people view these games. Imagine you're in a tournament, and instead of being in a stadium, you can still have the stadium option, let's say into the future, post social distancing. You can have the people who are in the stadium watching the players play live. You could also have people at home. Now, the people at home, if they're using virtual reality headsets, they could either have themselves immersed in that stadium with the roaring fans, or one further, they could have themselves immersed in the game, hopping between different viewpoints and watching it unfold in front of them, be it, a football manager match, or be it something like an Overwatch game with two teams going at each other. It could be, and having, so for example, on the Premier League matches that have been played recently, they've added, I think it was the FIFA soundtrack or the FIFA backing noise to it to create an atmosphere. But so imagine yourself being in a virtual reality headset, having that atmosphere of the crowd, getting hyped up, getting amped up with things unfolding right in front of them during a tournament. But then on top of that, they can either have themselves in the crowd where a 360 camera has been placed, or they can have themselves in, the actual game itself and able to hop and pivot just with a click of a button between different points and look around as if they were in the game themselves and watching, in the game themselves and watching, from different angles as immersed can be. And they're able to do that because, with virtual reality, you're essentially able to immerse yourself in this environment that previously was only accessible through a screen. So there are countless areas and countless ways that VR can essentially revolutionize and help further push the atmosphere and the excitement that esports bring, to the masses.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. And I think as well, that idea of being able to potentially be, whether it's in a game or whether it's in with a setting of an esports stadium, that idea of being able to jump around and shift position as a spectator and be able to get sight of all of those different views on the play. I mean, that's fantastic, both as something that's entertaining, but also, for things like analysis, that's going to really help you if you're wanting to try and get different perspectives on a sport or on a game, to be able to look at what's going on and actually understand it, crucially important. So I think that's really, really interesting stuff. And I think, as one final question then for the panelists, because I've noticed the chat has been a little bit shy today, but that's absolutely fine. It's late on a Thursday. We all know that it gets a bit tiring at this point of the week. I've got just one final question, which is a tough one, because we don't know what the next 12 months really are going to hold in terms of all of our lives right now, because it's quite up in the air. But do we have predictions of what kind of things we're expecting to see from the future of games within the next 12 months to 2 years? I mean, I'm going to go one at a time. We've got 2 minutes each. So, Gavin, I'm going to go to you first. So no pressure, but what do you think the future holds? Ooh, wow, Gavin's thinking about it. That's my thinking.
There we go. disabled. I see the future for, particularly for the esports, and we've touched a lot on this, is being more mainstream in people's living rooms as opposed to hosted on independent platforms. I see the future for the games publishers to make more from that, not in terms of money, but from global reach and to engaging with new audiences. So I really do see that this has been able to promote that growth. But I also see, though, that from my side of the house, from the creativity side, purely from here east, I see a lot of reconfiguration now of how businesses are going to work, and how that is actually going to play into the creative process. And there'll be more focus about what you do in the office as opposed to why you come to the office. And I think Miles mentioned it earlier, that we need to get people around the table, we need to get people together. There'll be deep dive appearances at times where you come together for that, which means the reconfiguration. So I think the future holds I think it's going to be quite exciting. We spoke a lot earlier about what is the new normal, or are we going back to the old normal? No, we're not. And there's lots of crash sentences or segments in the 90s, change or die or whatever. I think there is a real moment here, which is the traditional businesses are going to go to 9 to 5 are going to lose out. There's going to be a demand for something different. So I think there's a couple there, one about the technology and the platforms, and the other one about how do we create that technology and those platforms from an office and creative sector.
Fantastic. Dami, take a look into your crystal ball. What are you seeing?
Well, in terms of the future of games, I definitely think that there'll be an increase in demand in the long run for sure. I think that more people will be comfortable socializing with their friends, maybe over a weekend if they're not feeling like going out, over a game or two. And in terms of just in general, I think, people are going to try and find the perfect mix and the perfect balance, so they'll want to be as social as possible in person. But I think once they're also not in person, I think they'll be looking at, new and innovative ways to stay in contact and stay in touch. Because as we know, Zoom and video calls are great. But I think as people get more comfortable with using new types of technologies like VR, we'll find and see way more applications of bringing people together, even if they may not physically be together. So I think we're actually going to find a world that's moving closer towards, a different element or a different definition of mixed reality, essentially mixing both virtual and real world and sort of hopping between the two fairly seamlessly to create quite an interesting socializing experience, but one that will definitely shape the future of social interaction going forward.
Fantastic. And Miles?
I think Dami's absolutely spot on with the way that socializing is going to change, and games will be part of that socializing. But for me, there are 2 5s in the future. One is Unreal 5, which is the new engine that comes out later in the year. Everything that I've seen from that so far is going to see graphic fidelity jumps that we've dreamt of before. It's utterly incredible what the engine seems to be capable of, and that won't only be driving games in the future, it's going to be driving films in the future. The other 5 is 5G, which is going to increase the global reach and the global market for games to countries where there hasn't been a games market as yet, whether that be playing games via phones, in which case, whether it be via phones or whether it be via consoles or via PCs. The games that I used to play 40 years ago when the Spectrum first came out, those were my first experiences and got me into them. The people having their first experiences being some of the titles that will be coming out for next generation consoles is bonkers. But the most important thing is for me is the stuff that Dami spoke about there, of how a Saturday night people not going to the pub anymore because they can instead be at home with a friend of theirs in Essex, another friend of theirs in Liverpool, and a friend of theirs in Massachusetts, watching it's not just competitive gaming. It could be watching people playing games and talking about it whilst they're playing games, a new form of cinema.
And even watching a film or performance of a music act within the game, which has been
Absolutely, as Fortnite are doing already, Gavin.
absolutely.
Absolutely massive stuff. And so I think on that particular note, we're going to round up this conversation. So I'd like to say thank you very much to the panelists who've all taken time out their afternoons to take part in this. And thank you all, of course, for coming along as well. I know that the Games London team, if you want to connect with any of us after the event, they're going to be here and able to help you. We've all got our profiles on Deal Room as well, so I'm sure people are going to be able to contribute there. And I know that as well that this is going to be recorded, and it has already been recorded. It's too late now. It's happened, so you're going to be able to watch that one later. So on that particular note, thank you so much for all coming along, and I hope you have a good rest of your weeks and stay very safe.